When the paramedics pulled Bridget Cole from the crushed driver's seat of her small silver car, her first clear thought was not about the blood running down her forehead or the sharp pain in her ribs. It was about her phone. She lay on the cold asphalt, rain misting lightly over her face, sirens screaming in the distance, and whispered, "Please don't let him call yet." The firefighters spoke over her, one saying, "Ma'am, stay with us," while another cut through twisted metal. But Bridget's eyes were fixed on her handbag lying a few feet away. Inside it was the device that connected her to the one person who had the power to hurt her more deeply than any truck ever could, her son, Adrian Cole. When the phone finally rang, even before she was lifted onto the stretcher, her heart began to pound harder than the pain in her body. "It's him," she muttered weakly. A paramedic picked up the phone and asked, "Should I answer?" Bridget hesitated, then nodded. The paramedic placed the phone to her ear. "Mom, where are you?" Adrian's voice snapped through the speaker. It was not filled with worry. It was sharp and impatient. "Adrian," she breathed, her voice shaking, "there's been an accident." There was a pause. Then his response came cold and cutting. "An accident? Seriously? You promised to pick up Mia. You can't even handle one simple responsibility." Bridget closed her eyes, and in that moment, lying broken on the roadside, she felt something inside her crack far worse than bone. Bridget had spent most of her adult life surviving. When Adrian's father, Marcus Hale, disappeared 26 years earlier without explanation, she had been left with a 3-year-old boy and a stack of unpaid bills. "He'll come back," her mother had once said gently. But Bridget had known better. Marcus never called. He never sent money. He never asked about his son. So Bridget stopped waiting. She worked mornings at a bakery and nights cleaning office buildings. There were weeks she ate only toast and tea so Adrian could have proper meals. When he asked, "Mom, why don't you eat with me?" she would smile and say, "I already ate at work, sweetheart." It was a lie she told, so often it became part of her routine. She attended every school play, even if she had to stand in the back in her cleaning uniform. "That's my mom," Adrian used to shout proudly when he was little. Those memories were the ones she clung to. She remembered him hugging her legs and saying, "When I grow up, I'll take care of you." Back then, she believed him. She believed love worked like a promise written in stone. But as Adrian grew older, something shifted. Gratitude turned into expectation. "You're my mother," he would say whenever she hesitated. "It's your job." Bridget convinced herself that he was just stressed, that adulthood was hard. She kept giving, because giving was the only language of love she knew. The morning of the accident had started like many others, with pressure. Adrian had called her at 6 a.m. "Mom, don't forget you're picking up Mia from daycare at 4. Clara has a late meeting." Clara was his wife, a woman who rarely hid her disapproval of Bridget. "Of course, I'll be there," Bridget replied, even though she had already agreed to cover an extra shift at the grocery store. "You're always late," Adrian added. "Please, just this once, be reliable." The word stung, but she swallowed her feelings. By afternoon, heavy traffic clogged the highway. A delivery truck ahead of her swerved suddenly, and before she could react, everything went white with the sound of metal colliding. When she regained awareness, smoke filled the air, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Her head throbbed, and blood dripped into her eyes. Yet through the chaos, she reached blindly for her purse. "My phone. I need my phone," she murmured. She wasn't thinking about calling for help. She was thinking about Adrian's anger. When he finally heard about the crash, his voice hardened. "You always have excuses," he snapped through the speaker. "You're unbelievable." Mia was the last kid waiting. Bridget tried to explain, her voice barely audible. "Adrian, I was hit by a truck." But he interrupted her. "You're so useless sometimes." The word useless echoed louder than the crash itself, settling deep inside her chest. At the hospital, Bridget lay awake long after the nurses finished stitching the deep cut near her hairline. The doctor had told her she had a mild concussion and severe bruising along her ribs. "You need rest and less stress," he advised kindly. She almost laughed at that. Less stress felt like a foreign language. Her sister, Lorraine sat beside her bed and held her hand. "Bridget, this isn't normal," Lorraine said softly. "The way Adrian talks to you, it's not right." Bridget stared at the ceiling. "He's just overwhelmed," she replied automatically. Lorraine shook her head.
"No."
"You almost died today. And he called you useless." The word hung in the air between them. Bridget felt tears slide quietly into her hairline. "Maybe I failed him somehow," she whispered. Lorraine squeezed her hand firmly. "You gave that boy everything." For the first time in years, Bridget allowed herself to replay the conversation without defending him. She heard the coldness in his tone. She saw how her body had tensed even before answering the phone. She realized that the fear she felt on the roadside had not been about dying. It had been about disappointing her son. That realization frightened her more than the accident. "Why am I more afraid of his anger than of a truck?" she asked quietly. Lorraine had no answer, but the silence spoke volumes. 2 weeks later, still moving slowly and carefully, Bridget stood in her small kitchen when Adrian stormed in unannounced. "So now you're ignoring my calls?" he demanded. His daughter, little Mia, clung to his leg, watching silently. Bridget wiped her hands on a towel and faced him. Her ribs ached, but her voice was steady. "I'm not ignoring you. I'm resting." Adrian scoffed. "Resting? Mom, Clara, and I can't keep adjusting our lives because you're fragile." The old Bridget would have apologized instantly. She would have said, "I'm sorry, I'll do better." But something had shifted during those quiet nights in the hospital. She looked at him carefully and replied, "I was in a serious accident, Adrian. I need time." He rolled his eyes. "You're being dramatic." The word struck her, but she did not shrink. Instead, she took a slow breath. "From now on," she said calmly, "I will not be picking Mia up from daycare. And I will not accept being called useless or dramatic again." Adrian stared at her as if she had spoken another language. "You're my mother," he snapped. "Exactly," she answered gently. "And I deserve respect." Mia tugged at her father's hand and whispered, "Daddy, Grandma is hurt." The innocence in the child's voice strengthened Bridget's resolve. For the first time, she chose silence over defense and boundaries over guilt, and in that quiet kitchen, her true recovery began. Adrian let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Respect," he repeated. "After everything Clara and I do, you're talking about respect?" Bridget noticed how quickly he changed the story, as if she were the one who had wronged him. Mia looked up at her grandmother with wide eyes, sensing the tension. Bridget lowered herself slowly into a chair, her body still sore, and said quietly, "Adrian, what exactly have you done for me?" The question surprised even her. He frowned. "What kind of question is that?" She held his gaze. "I have always shown up for you. School trips, late-night fevers, rent when you were behind, babysitting whenever you asked. Tell me honestly, when was the last time you showed up for me?" Adrian opened his mouth, but said nothing. Silence filled the room. Bridget continued gently, "When I was lying on the road bleeding, you didn't ask if I was alive. You asked why I was late." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know it was that serious," he muttered. "You didn't ask," she replied. That difference, she realized, was everything. That night, after Adrian left angrily with Mia, Bridget sat alone at her kitchen table. The house felt quieter than usual, but not lonely, just ill. She poured herself a cup of tea and allowed her thoughts to settle. For years, she had confused obligation with love. She had believed that if she kept sacrificing, one day Adrian would recognize her worth. But love that demands endless suffering is not love, it is control. She replayed Lorraine's words in her mind. "This isn't normal." Bridget whispered to herself, "It isn't." She remembered small moments she had ignored, the way Adrian would snap his fingers to get her attention, the way Clara would hand her diaper bags without even greeting her, the way decisions were made for her without asking if she was available. "You're free anyway," Clara once said casually. Bridget had laughed at the time. Now she saw it clearly. She had not been free. She had been expected. And expectation without gratitude had slowly turned into entitlement. A few days later, Adrian called again. Bridget stared at the phone for a long moment before answering. "Hello," she said calmly. His tone was less aggressive this time. "Mom, Clara has an emergency shift tomorrow. Can you just take Mia for the afternoon?" Bridget inhaled slowly. This was the test. "No, Adrian," she answered gently. There was immediate silence. "No," he repeated. "I'm still recovering. And even if I wasn't, I need you to arrange proper childcare. I can help occasionally, not constantly." His frustration flared. "So, you're punishing us now?" Bridget shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. "I'm protecting myself," he scoffed. "You've changed." She allowed a small, steady smile. "Yes," she replied. "I have." For the first time, saying no did not feel cruel. It felt necessary. Weeks passed, and the distance between them grew. Adrian's calls became less frequent. Sometimes Bridget wondered if she had gone too far. One evening, she sat with Lorraine on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "Do you regret it?" Lorraine asked gently. Bridget thought carefully. "I regret not doing it sooner," she admitted. "But I don't regret choosing peace." Lorraine nodded. "He'll either learn or he won't." Bridget looked down at her healing hands. "I don't want to lose my son," she whispered. "You're not losing him," Lorraine replied. "You're just no longer losing yourself." The words settled deeply inside her. For the first time, Bridget realized that loving someone did not require enduring their cruelty. One afternoon, there was a knock on Bridget's door. When she opened it, Adrian stood there alone. He looked tired. Not angry, just worn. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Bridget stepped aside, without speaking. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same place where so many painful conversations had happened. "I've been thinking," Adrian began awkwardly. "Clara said, maybe I overreacted." Bridget raised an eyebrow slightly. "Maybe," he sighed. "Okay, I did overreact." The admission was small, but it was the first crack in his pride. "I didn't realize how bad the accident was," he continued. I depend on you." Bridget nodded slowly. "That's part of the problem, Adrian. You depend on me, but you don't value me." He looked down at his hands. "I never meant to hurt you," Adrian said quietly. Bridget studied his face, searching for sincerity. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she replied. "When you call me useless, it stays with me." He winced at the word. "I was angry." "You are often angry," she answered softly. "And I have been the safest target." The truth lingered heavily between them. Adrian swallowed. "I guess I thought you'd always just take it." Bridget's chest tightened, but she did not cry. "That's exactly why I had to stop." For the first time, Adrian looked at her not as a convenience, but as a person. They talked for hours that afternoon. Bridget spoke about the years she skipped meals, about working double shifts, about crying quietly so he wouldn't see her exhaustion. Adrian listened in silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. Bridget gave a sad smile. "Because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I wanted you to feel loved." He rubbed his face, ashamed. "I thought you were just strong." "I am strong," she corrected gently. "But I am also human." That distinction seemed to change something in him. Strength did not mean she could not be hurt. It meant she had endured too much for too long. Before leaving, Adrian paused at the door. "So what happens now?" he asked. Bridget considered the question carefully. "Now we start over," she said. "With boundaries. With respect. If you speak to me with kindness, I will always be here. If you speak to me with cruelty, I will step away." He nodded slowly. "And Mia? I will see her when I am able and when I am asked, not commanded." Adrian managed a faint smile. "That sounds fair." It was the first time fairness had entered their relationship. After he left, Bridget felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. She walked to the mirror and studied her reflection. The scar near her hairline was fading, but it remained visible, a quiet reminder of the day everything changed. She touched it gently and whispered, "You survived." And she realized the survival was not only from the crash. It was from years of shrinking herself to keep someone else comfortable. She began taking short walks in the morning, reading books she had postponed for years, and even joining a small community art class. "You're glowing," Lorraine teased one day. Bridget laughed. "I'm resting," she replied. But it was more than rest. It was renewal. Months later, Bridget stood in her garden as Mia ran toward her with open arms. "Grandma," the little girl shouted joyfully. Adrian followed behind, carrying a small cake. "We brought dessert," he said, his voice calm and respectful. Bridget smiled warmly. Their relationship was not perfect, but it was healthier. There were still moments of tension, but now there were also apologies, conversations, and effort. As Mia hugged her tightly, Bridget looked at her son and said gently, "I love you." Adrian nodded. "I love you too, Mom." This time, the words felt different. They felt balanced. Bridget had not stopped loving her son. She had simply learned to love herself just as much. And in choosing boundaries over silence, she discovered that true survival is not just walking away from a wrecked car, it is walking toward peace with your head held high. Even with the progress they had made, Bridget understood that healing was not a straight road. There were still moments when old habits tried to return. One evening, Adrian called, sounding frustrated. "Mom, the babysitter canceled again. Can you come over right now?" His voice carried that familiar urgency, the tone that once made her drop everything. Bridget paused before answering. She was halfway through dinner, her art supplies spread across the table. "I can come tomorrow afternoon," she replied calmly. "But not tonight." There was a short silence. In the past, that silence would have been followed by irritation. This time, Adrian sighed. "Okay, I'll figure it out." After they hung up, Bridget noticed something important. She did not feel guilty. She felt steady. She returned to her painting, brushing soft colors across the canvas. It wasn't just about saying no, it was about trusting that her son could handle his own responsibilities. And for the first time, he was learning to do exactly that. A few weeks later, Adrian invited Bridget to dinner at his house. It was the first time in years she entered his home without feeling like hired help. Clara greeted her at the door with a careful but genuine smile. "Thank you for coming," she said. During dinner, Mia chattered happily while Adrian cleared the plates without asking his mother to do it. At one point, he looked at Bridget and said, "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, that you were the safest target. I'm working on that." Bridget met his eyes and nodded. "That's all I wanted. Effort." The conversation flowed more easily than it ever had. It wasn't perfect, but it was respectful. And respect, she realized, was the foundation they had been missing all along. Later that night, Bridget sat by her bedroom window, listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. She thought about the accident, the twisted metal, the rain on her face, the sting of being called useless. That moment had once felt like her breaking point. Now she saw it as her awakening. She understood something she hadn't before. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be diminished. It means standing firm in your worth, even when it is uncomfortable. Bridget closed her eyes and whispered softly, "I survived." She had survived the crash, the abandonment of her past, and the emotional weight she carried for decades. But more importantly, she had survived the fear of choosing herself. And in doing so, she found not only peace, but a stronger, healthier love that could finally grow without pain.